Care has the power to bring kindness where it's needed. It brings out the best in every one of us. It doesn't just see people. It takes time to understand them. It puts the needs of others ahead of its own. And when you start with care, you end up with a very different kind of bank. Truist. Truist Bank, member FDIC.
There's only one road into Key West, but you won't believe where it can take you. Travel back in time to a city rich with history. Discover amazing artists and musicians. Taste seafood fresh off the boat. Or just kick back and soak up the island vibe. For more about Key West and the latest safety protocols, visit flakeys.com. Key West, close to perfect, far from normal.
Predators. Their acts are evil. We call them monsters. We say no human could perpetrate the crimes they have committed. But in truth, only human beings execute these horrific acts. And if you're like me, you want to know why. I'm Ariel Cooksey, and this is Malice. Hi, monsters, and welcome to a very special episode of Malice. It is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I have an incredible guest on with me today that I'd like to tell you a little bit about. Joey Ortega began as an actor who quickly began to find success on stage, TV, and screen, as well as building a career in music. At the same time, in an effort to make ends meet, he also pursued his other passion, crime and justice. A passion that developed as a child when his hometown was in a profound state of fear as the original Night Stalker or Golden State Killer, and then later the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, were in the height of their reign of terror in the area. This would become the key shifting point from pursuing a life of running alongside celebrities to a life of protecting them from some of the world's most dangerous predators. Joey's passion officially started as an investigative career early at the age of 18, working as an apprentice investigator for local detectives. He started out doing insurance fraud investigations and background investigations. Proving adept in the areas of surveillance and information gathering, Joey continued to seek further investigative challenges. From there, he went on to do international investigations for a number of companies that include Sears Roebuck Company, Saks Fifth Avenue, and Kmart.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.
That time you got home from a week of double shifts and your dog didn't recognize you.
Let's go. Hey, it's me. Do you want a treat? Oh!
You knew it was time for something new. Let's job it up. At CareerBuilder, you can find jobs with the work-life balance and salary you want. Plus, build a resume and apply to multiple jobs in just one click. Start your search at CareerBuilder.com.
He was largely responsible for investigating issues of internal theft, embezzlement, workers' comp fraud, and crime ring investigations. His success eventually earned him a position as a national investigator for a cellular chain, investigating crime rings on a national level. Trained in the Reed technique, Joey was able to gain confessions consistently without a single prosecution ever being challenged in court. Throughout his career as an internal investigator, Joey continued to work for various private investigative agencies. Moving away from insurance fraud, Joey began developing his skills in the areas of defense investigation, fidelity investigation, missing persons investigations, and stalker investigations. It was the area of stalker investigations that Joey began to discover his passion for computer crime investigations. Having to learn quickly how to trace harassing and threatening emails, Joey began to see that this is where the future of crime and justice was heading and decided to throw himself deeply into the subject. As a result, Joey's clientele began to include those who were victims of internet fraud and cyber attacks. One of Joey's methods of tracking down eBay fraudsters was featured in PI Magazine in June of 2005. Eventually, Joey began hosting the radio show Behind the Yellow Tape, using his talents in both investigation and public media to analyze cold cases and serial killer cases, earning him an audience of legal, law enforcement, forensic, and media professionals spanning over 20 countries. With that increasing respect and attention also came an influx of criminals, hackers, and hate bloggers looking to discredit and slow Joey's media and investigative work. This only drove Joey even deeper into his passion to expose the truth, advocate for victims, and in his unique way that both entertains and educates. Following a battle with hackers from the hacking collective Anonymous, who sought to push him and his show off a rape case in Steubenville he helped bring to light, Joey sought to tell the story of his being thrown into the hacking underworld and the hard-fought and won battles against a new kind of war on terror that still resonates today. He decided to return to his musical roots to tell his story using the name of a hacker alter ego, Sophocles, he developed during his investigation and chase of a terrorist group holding a small Ohio town under siege. Still active and passionate as both an investigator and artist, Joey is also heard on all major streaming platforms as Sophocles and most recently as Tesla Da Vinci. So monsters, without further ado, I would like to introduce one of the most impressive people I've ever met, and also I'm proud to call him my friend, Joey Ortega. Welcome, Joey.
Hey, thank you.
So Joey is here today to discuss stalking, which is one of his areas of expertise, and how that sort of overlaps with domestic violence. So Joey, let's jump in.
Yeah.
Okay. I think first off, it's sort of a 101 because stalking is something that everybody feels as if they know what it is, right? But it's often confusing because it can be seen in so many different ways.
Absolutely.
And types. And so as a general rule, would you give us sort of an overarching umbrella type of explanation of what stalking is and then kind of go into the different types?
Yeah. It can be really confusing even when you try to determine typologies, methodologies, and so forth. It really is context dependent. Are you asking the sociologist? Are you asking the prosecutor? But as a general broad definition of stalking that I find to be most universally acceptable, I usually define it as efforts by one or more persons to either menace or terrorize a target in an effort to either outright torture or influence their actions.
That helps a lot, I think, just to kind of set the stage for kind of diving in deeper, right? There are multiple typologies, right?
Yes.
Would you mind kind of going into those? Because I think that our discussion is going to touch on a lot of them. And I think that it's important to make those distinctions. Right.
So I'll try to give a somewhat of a general overview. I mean, I'm not a sociologist. I mean, I am a nerd, so I do read more than I should probably, but it does help sometimes. But so I'll just start with sort of an overview and then kind of give the typologies as I define them and apply them and in terms of a context of what I do. But I mean, really, generally, typologies will fall under certain categories. Some will go by describing the perpetrator. So one study, again, was that tried to go by describing the perpetrator. One well-known was by Sheridan and others in 2001 called Stalker Typologies, a law enforcement perspective. And they classify them as ex-partner, infatuation, delusional, or sadistic. So generally it's focused on the role of the stalker, whereas others looked at the one called a study, I think it was 2006 by Malloy and others. They described it as the recon typology or relational or context. And so it's more of their relationship to the victim or really describing the victim basically, as opposed to describing the stalker. So that one fell under 4, which was intimate. So like a boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, an acquaintance, a public figure, or a stranger.
So that in that case would be like intimacy seeking, right? It's not that they necessarily have had intimacy, real or perceived.
No, so in this, the way this laid out in typology, the focus appeared to be more on just understanding the relationship, not necessarily the motivation completely.
Gotcha.
Although there were studies by Miller and others in 2012, which I lean towards as then adapted towards the work I do just based on experience. Where his 2012 studies, Stalking Patterns, Motives, I can't remember the full title. I'll get you citations for this and links for your audience on the site.
Fabulous.
I'll send those to you.
Thank you.
And they describe those 4 typologies, which is either romantic delusion, reclaiming a relationship as just a sadistic urge to torture, and then over-identification. So I think like single white female kind of situation. But then I, because again, based on my casework, I added an additional, which is just retribution. So sometimes I could just be somebody who was slighted or felt slighted. That was more applicable. I mean, these other typologies are valuable in general in understanding and kind of forming your kind of inner heuristic machine when you're investigating. Mm-hmm. But as a practical investigative and case building tool, it's difficult. Like, so on the 2001 study, it's hard to type up when you don't know who the stalker is. It's not as easy to put them in that box of what typology they fit right away. And then with the recon typology, again, you don't always know who the stalker is. So even though you know who the victim is and you might know everything about them, you can't draw assumptions too easily about that relationship. So a lot of these studies, they kind of build on like establishing those and then trying to opine or offer means of how one can then respond to it. But so it's not practical, but helpful. But as a key investigative tool, I find it's much easier to start to kind of deduce or divine their motives based on the tone of their letters, emails, the means of attack. And then I'm able to also look into key language cues, like what's their vocabulary like, what words did they hit a lot? And that starts to tell me something about their education, as well as their areas of focus, and oftentimes even their gender. Some people are like, you're classifying people, but it's profiling in general. Not that I call myself a profiler, but really I am an intelligence analyst. I do have background in intelligence, and I do that almost every day in my consulting work, literally all over the globe. And really profiling, Mark Safrick, people know him, one of the most famous profilers out there right now, alongside John Douglas. And, I had the pleasure of interviewing him. I had the honor of being his friend, and I've had him on my previous shows when I was running a blog Behind the Yellow Tape that's in hiatus. But I gave Roy Hazelwood's last interview. I learned a lot from these people, these like masters of the art, as I call them, like Park Dietz and others. But really, when you break it down, Mark Safrick put it good. It's like usually we're not looking for somebody who's like he explained that education's important, but we're also there's more value in the homicide cop who's been a homicide cop for like 20 years. They're going to catch on to this, and they're going to be more successful in this. It is the way I'm paraphrasing them, but it's sort of how he broke it down. And he said himself, and even when you're brought into the unit for the first few years, you're just listening. You're listening and watching and paying attention. And I get that, because when you look at it that way, all profiling is it's a form of intelligence analysis. You're building an intelligence base that allows you to pick up trends. Like, okay, so we find, okay, we have 13 Hispanic females who are all dying. Statistically, we find that we're looking for a Hispanic male. It's not racial profiling. It's just understand the statistics. And of course, it's
a pattern,
right? You're looking for patterns, and they're there to provide a investigative heuristic, an investigative tool, not a scientific, which is a problem that people have with, they keep trying to apply to what we do or into profiling in general. The FBI are always falling under scrutiny because scientists are trying to say it's not a scientist, but profilers never said it was.
Right. And I remember both John Douglas and Robert Ressler, who were really like the OGs of the behavioral science, which is now the behavioral analysis unit for the FBI, and profiling. They both kind of said it's somewhere in a gray area between art and science, right?
Right.
And I think that that's accurate, because they are looking at aggregates and there's data there. And so there is a scientific component to it, but there's also, like you were saying, this observational or experiential part of it, which is one of the reasons I remember Jim Clemente at one point talking about how you can pontificate all you want,
Right.
but there is a certain amount that comes down to being in the field and being exposed to those things firsthand. Anyway, I just think that that's really important. And you touched on racial profiling, right?
Right.
And I would love for you to go a little further into the differences between what you've explained in terms of criminal profiling versus something like racial profiling.
Right. So, again, you're just looking at statistics. And first, I guess it helps us take a step back and just help people understand intelligence and intelligence analysis in general, like what you see, like any agency like the NSA, CIA, or even private intelligence groups, Dynacorp or such. When they're trying to say find a terrorist group or those responsible for an attack or a threat of an attack, they're pulling in data all over, and then they decide what question are we trying to answer. And this might be like, okay, who is most likely to bomb the U.S. and use this type of explosive or something. So then they kind of tear down that data, pull out what the term is used as actionable, meaning something that can be taken now and act upon. Now you can send the boots to the ground and to go and determine if that's the case, or to take some sort of action to confirm or prevent or even directly intervene, whether it's an arrest, a raid, or whatever. So you're just taking out your action. So an intelligence report is going to be a series of just basically pieces of actionable intel. For just simplest term, it's a little more than that, but. So when a profiling report is the same way, they're basically looking at the behaviors of a crime scene. They're saying, okay, this person seems to like to carve certain letters into their victims. They, leave a rose, they apparently don't, they leave them naked, but there's no evidence of actual sexual assault.
Right. Or something even like the Boston Strangler, where he would tie bows on his.
Exactly. Those are those signatures, which is, and we would call that some actionable intel, something that's very specific. And so the profile is really an intelligence report handed from the FBI or whatever service they've hired to the actual investigating agency, the local police. And they're basically giving them an intelligence report telling them you're most likely looking for a white male, probably in the ages between 30 and 35, who, based on what the behavioral cues were observed at the scene, and then what statistics have shown to be the case, what it correlated to racially, demographic, any sort of demographic, even like level of education, and then are they organized, disorganized? Where again, we had great talks about that, but especially Roy Hazelwood when he discussed that paper of organized dichotomy, which is really a misnomer. It was based on a paper that him and John Douglas wrote that took off, but that really it's more of a continuum. And so, but that's another key piece of intelligence. So it helps you. It's done not as a means of divining. Okay, so I sense it's going to be this guy. It gives the actual investigating agency, the local agency, a means of quickly clearing the suspect pool, basically, and honing in. And it's been proven to be successful when applied correctly.
So it operates kind of like a sieve.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. So when people try to say, oh, well, I think it's this guy because I profiled him. Actually, a lot of times profilers don't want to know anything about suspects. They don't want to know who they suspect. They just want to see the crime scene and the evidence and make their determinations about a general description of. They're not going to go and say, hey, I'm going to profile you. I mean, they're not fortune tellers.
Exactly. And I think that it is important to point that out. Thank you, Joey. When it comes to investigations and the way that they should operate as law enforcement, very similarly to scientific inquiry, right? Mm-hmm. We have to start with the crime scene, the victimology, and the profile before you even start looking at suspects. Otherwise, you can make anyone fit that crime that you want to. And if you zero in on somebody and then look for evidence about them, you've put blinders on yourself.
If you read any sort of because today everybody's an armchair detective, you read these Facebook groups or any group online forums, they're basically saying, I suspect this and based on this and this and that. But one of the biggest dangers to an investigation is confirmation bias. And so that's why profilers, the good ones, don't want to know anything about suspects or anything.
100%.
They're trying to protect themselves and the report from confirmation bias. So yeah, and it's kind of scary the way people tend to look at profiling or apply it. Even now, when you look at this, the Gabby Petito case, we still don't know. I mean, unfortunately, may never know if Brian did it, but just based on statistics that people threw out there that really, and signs that experts never articulated. Not only is he a murderer, but apparently he's been beating Gabby for years, although there's nobody who's been able to correlate that. But now she'll forever become this poster child for domestic violence, even though she may not have been. The one incident we know of, unfortunately, the investigation, multiple witness reports, and including a confession and physical evidence, supported the conclusion that Gabby was harming Brian at least in that one incident. And even then, I'm not going to say, well, that proves she's been abusing him for years. And
right.
So you can't say the opposite about Brian on even less evidence. But that's the problem, is confirmation bias that we're watching take place there.
That's absolutely right. We have to make some leaps in judgment in order to fit this narrative. Of course, we're all going to look at it and go, the boyfriend did it. And he might have. The fact is, though, is that we may, like you said, never know. But there is this component in Gabby's own words talking about how they were in a kind of a volatile relationship and on again, off again, and that they had gotten physical with each other. So however you choose to interpret that, there is some evidence that it's entirely possible they were both engaging in that behavior. And
I think one of the cops was quoted as describing to Gabby that their relationship is toxic. And
yes,
that I would agree with.
Absolutely. I agree with that as well.
That still doesn't mean a toxic means that the boyfriend is a monster.
Right. And it very well could. But when you are in those toxic relationships, regardless, there are things that are going to happen that are not healthy, even if it doesn't involve physicality. So I think that that's a really important thing to point out.
Right. So like when I'm having these debates online with people on Twitter, I'm just trying to open up minds and try to get people to look at things critically. Like I try to make it clear. I'm like, look, I'm not exonerating Brian. Personally, based on just the obvious, I could see why others might immediately assume he did it. And I'm still thinking he did it possibly, but I'm not concluding it. And apparently neither is the FBI, because they haven't even named him a suspect. And I use that to check myself to say, if even these professionals who have basically a wealth of resources and all the investigative, all the case insight that's available, still won't call this man a suspect, that has to mean something. And so I'm not going to jump to any more conclusions. They will, but I'm going to keep my mind open to everything. And that's what I try to get people to understand. And just to look at everything outside of any context you're putting into it. If you're looking for signs of domestic abuse, then, when she says things
you're
like,
going to find them.
Right. Like what was the one key evidence when she said, well, I was trying to work on my blog and he doesn't think I could do it, or along those lines. You know what? My wife might be nervous about me if I said, hey, I'm going to be strictly a musician. She might be a little nervous about it. That doesn't mean she's abusing me. And that's one incident. But when we look at the periphery of everything, fine, she reported that statement, and let's just say it's true. But what else have we seen? We've seen this montage of clips over time where he's willingly participated in her efforts to build this blog. He's so you got to look at that as evidence. You can't just, but confirmation bias says, oh, well, he was faking it.
You can't cherry pick as far as that's concerned. And I'm coming at this from a background in science, right? Soft science for anybody who's a naysayer, but my background is in sociology and social psychology. And, when you go to the, experimental route, when you're doing fresh research, as opposed to like meta-analysis, where you're taking an amalgamation, just for anybody who doesn't know if you're not familiar with that jargon. Anyway, if you go the experimental route, you can go in and you can have a hypothesis, right? Here's what I think is going to happen, but you don't go in trying to prove that. You go in trying to disprove that. You are needing to find as much evidence as you can that would counteract what you believe. And that's the way that you come to the least biased outcomes or conclusions, right? Because if you can disprove your hypothesis, then you have to sort of move past that. And it's an important thing to understand. But it's the same thing as like, okay, we think that the boyfriend did it. Well, let's figure out all the ways that couldn't have happened, right?
Right.
It's still, you still run the risk of confirmation bias. I don't recommend that in law enforcement and investigations that you should do that. But I'm just saying, if you do, that needs to be your goal.
What I found to be helpful in my investigations and what I've trained people to do is, be the best damn investigator you can be, but also try to be the best damn defense attorney you can be. So when you're investigating, look at everything through the eyes of the defense attorney. What can they say to try to manipulate or talk their client out of it? So basically make every effort while you're trying to build your case, make every effort to try to tear it down. And then realize, okay, I better close that window, close that door. So that way, by the time, that's what's helped me. I've never had to testify in court for any of my cases because I take that approach. Thankfully, I did a little luck there too. I'm not saying I'm awesome, but
I do.
You promised not to make me blush on there.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, but I credit it because I try to do that. I try to think, what are they going to do to try to get out of it once they've made their confession or I've gotten the evidence and they have the cuffs on them, and it's proven helpful. So yeah, it's for along the lines of what you're saying, to protect against confirmation bias, make every effort to try and defeat your own case.
I absolutely love that approach. I love it. I wouldn't have put it in those terms. But it's perfect. You're so great.
I did some investigation work for a lot of attorneys, including defense attorneys, and I found it to be so valuable. Really, people call, working for the dark side. I'm like, yeah, but then you also learn how to fight the dark side. So
it's true. It's true. And, I think defense attorneys in a lot of cases get a bad rap.
We need them. We need them.
Absolutely. How many people have we seen with like the advent of DNA evidence that have been exonerated for crimes? Defense attorneys are there to make sure that trials are fair as they possibly can. And there are innocent people.
Absolutely. Again, you could look at the Gabby Petito case in this one again, because that's a great study on how defense attorneys are seen and treated. I mean, they are merciless on the Laundrie's attorney, and he's just doing his job, but they're saying, oh, he's a villain and all this stuff, or, oh, they hired a really highly rated attorney. That's proof of guilt. I'm like, no, that's proof of parents wanting the best for their kid to keep them out of jail. I'm like, you would do that, especially if they're innocent. So that's not proof of guilt. But so it's things like that, and saying he's a villain for trying to defend him. But what do people think? Like that the courts are going to say, oh, well, you couldn't find a defense attorney, so I guess we'll proceed without one. You're screwed. Like somehow he ruined their fun.
Yeah,
it just doesn't work that way.
Right. And I worked in the court system for a number of years, and there are so many people who end up with public defenders, and that is an admirable job. It's a tough job, and it's a tough job. Yeah. It pays absolute shit, but it's very necessary, and I think it takes a lot of dedication to do.
Yeah, I don't down public defenders. I mean, I've known many solid ones who do it because they love what they do, and that's why they do it. But unfortunately, there's a good number of them that do it because it's the only job they can get, and they're just out of law school. And unfortunately, if my life is on the line, I'm going to want the best damn fighter who's going to fight for me, especially if I'm innocent.
Absolutely. So bringing this back around to stalking and domestic violence, right? Yeah. I think that the Petito Laundrie case is a good segue because we're getting a touch of that domestic violence element. But when we're looking at stalking within the context of domestic violence, we're talking about established relationships, right? So what does it look like when it begins? What are the signs that these things are starting up?
The beginnings are a little different than the typical stranger case, so that's a good delineation. So you'll find sort of passive-aggressive means of monitoring and controlling sometimes. Again, these, like everything else, signs in and of themselves are not proof. You got to look in the context of everything, like an abundance of sign, and in context of other areas of a given relationship or incident. But, good examples would be, you have a boyfriend and you guys are only dated for like, say, 2 weeks or even a couple months, and they gift you with a cell phone. That's, been a commonly noted trait as someone that's beginning of trying to give a leash. Things like, ooh, let's share social media, asking a lot about their posts, clearly showing that they're, I find overactivity with a post I remember I worked one case, and it was more an unofficial for a friend, but, she was a public figure, and she was really being stalked by somebody, but she wasn't sure who. But first thing I did is I looked at her social media, and what I found was one person who was liking all of their things, liking every single post. They just liked or going on for months. And it turned out, and it was a cop, and it was a cop that it turned out she had dated like years ago for a few months, but he was still all over. And so they were able to, from there, realize who was messing with her and take action. So overactivity with their social media that clearly indicates more monitoring than engagement, stuff like that. Preoccupation on their own social media, like all they post are things about their girlfriend or boyfriend, pictures and everything. Some might try to defend it as, or even they might try to defend it. Oh, I'm just really proud of you. But really, it's more like they're pissing on their tree to the world.
Right. And that kind of speaks to how in the beginnings, these things, it's during a love bombing type of phase.
Yes.
But you start seeing these little precipitating kind of things. For instance, one of the ones that I hear about a lot, and I work with domestic violence and stalking as well, not as an investigator, but on the other side of that. One of the things that I hear very commonly is he wants to know where I am. Like he checks in a lot. He calls a lot. I only use he because I work with women, and that's typically the case, but when that first starts, they think, oh, he's being protective, and he's, he misses me, and, he's thinking of me. And when you start to step back a little bit and look at it, you're like, yeah, but he wants to know where you are. He's monitoring your movements, right? And that would qualify as a stalking behavior, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one stalking behavior. Again, sometimes it's some people are just really affectionate, and that might be the only thing. So if they're not still asking them, where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going? What, and just, really, then you should really be concerned. But so that's what I mean. It's really confusing. I'm trying not to, I don't want somebody taking these and then start sabotaging their own relationships because some overly affectionate guy, she goes, oh, you're a sucker, and then, so now she has no relationship and he has no chance of a new one, So.
Right. I mean, it's hard because this is such a nuanced thing, which is one of the big reasons I wanted to bring you on, because I think there's a lot of oversimplification.
Absolutely. It really is. And there are all these people today in public discourse and social media, they rely on these sort of keywords and key definitions, gaslighting, harassment, which all seem like they're clearly self-explaining. But really, you got to understand where the context in which that word is being used, because, someone using like the word stalker in one context, oh, he stalks me, my husband stalks me, is different than, this neighbor that I once said hi to has been stalking me. And that's a stalker. That's different. They're both stalking, but we call this guy the stalker, and we go out. Whereas this guy might be the abusive, that goes into areas of domestic violence or intimate partner violence and so forth, which is people are going to address that stalking behavior, but they're going to address it differently. Because again, so you got to understand the context in which a word is being defined. And we have to be careful when we're reading and using certain keywords when we're trying to make a point, because sometimes we could just result in making people, in the effort of sounding expert, we end up making people dumber, which I personally call the Nancy Grace effect. I'm sorry. It was the reason why I even started my true crime career, because I wanted to undo all the damage she was doing to people's understanding.
Look, I'm Joey. I love you to death. She totally just unsubscribed from my $5 tier.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Nancy.
That's half a box of Girl Scout cookies gone.
No, I don't think she subscribes. Anyway, back to it.
Yeah, so I mean, and she would often bring up, these sort of experts, and some of them were, had bona fide creds, but a lot of them, when she would read off their bios, it was more like, well, they appeared here, and they wrote this book, but it doesn't really talk about what they did. When you're talking about things like investigation, forensic, blood pattern analysis, I don't want to know how many times they've appeared on Oprah to talk about blood pattern analysis. I want to know how many times they've actually analyzed blood pattern. At the time when I started my show, I would go after, some of her guests that were pseudo guests or pseudo experts like Pat Brown and stuff, and would go after them until they stopped showing up on the air. But then with the actual experts, they have expertise, but they don't have the investigative insight. One of my professors, Tom Mahoney, in my justice studies class, he was a police chief for Pasadena. He would describe what they say as a swag, which is basically at the end of the day, all they're providing you is a sophisticated wild ass guess. And he's like, so you can only do so much with it. It's not, they still don't really know anything about the case at hand that they're opining on. And it's great to listen to, but they're offering maybe just a little more than what the pseudo experts are offering.
Sure. So when we're seeing stalking behavior, and we can take this in domestic violence situations or outside of it, right? There is a period in which it escalates. Can you talk about that some in terms of what that looks like and what may be the precipitating factors?
So we've talked about the sort of the love bombing, the gifts of a phone, the extra, let's share social media, let's share emails. It's, and sometimes it'll be more passive aggressive, like, I want you to be able to trust me. And so I'm just giving you all my passwords right now. And and then later on did you want to give me yours? And try to make them feel like, oh yeah, I don't want to feel like I'm not giving this. But it's manipulative stuff. It's very passive aggressive usually. See more as like they're doing them a favor by putting them in a position to give up their emails and to now have a geotag in their possession at all times. From there, if they feel the control is not being maintained or lost, common trend that I found was then affection would go to increased vulnerability or need. Suddenly it's like, I suffered loss back then. And you're reminding me of when you didn't come home when you said you did. You're reminding me of just like when my mom never came home. And I understand I'm really screwed up about it, and it triggers me. I'm sorry. I probably I shouldn't give you a hard time, but enough so then they start. Oh no, honey, I'm so glad you told me this. I'm going to make more effort to tell you where I am. So that's where it starts to. They'll appeal from their heart to their sympathies or guilt, and then from there, if it need be, in their campaign for control, they will then go to moral outrage. Who does that? Who wears that at a club? Really? I mean, who? You want people to seem like you're a slut? You want to get raped? It goes to like now they're kind of creeping, and now they're over them, mightier than them, and so it seems, and then that can be. Right.
I'm sorry. It can be more subtle than that, right? Like somebody
it builds over time. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of skin.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
That kind of thing. Yeah. Okay.
But which leads into this sort of moral outrage phase.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then usually from there, it's now establishment of position at that. And now it's clear they're in control. They're abusing them either physically, financially, emotionally, usually a combination of these. Then the only way to go is to get out, and then it'll either end or it'll reach its final stage, in which now it becomes basically enmity. And now they make every effort to punish them. It'll seem like it's in the context of pulling them back in the relationship, and they might want that, but really it leads to some sort of punishment, whether it be further beatings, humiliation, or death.
Right.
I mean, these are, again, oversimplified sort of descriptions. But.
Sure. But important, I think.
Yeah.
In Laura Richards, she was a profiler for New Scotland Yard, did a lot of work with the FBI as well. She is a huge mover and shaker in anti-stalking, anti-coercive control, was a big part of having legislation changed in England in order to make those things illegal. So in her words, she refers to stalking as murder in slow motion. Would you say that's accurate to an extent?
If unchecked, then yeah, absolutely. It's hard though, because sometimes you're just dealing with a really needy person, and that needy person they could still be on that road, and then somebody could get out or call them out and say, I'm done with this. You're too needy for me. And that person could end up, they're not necessarily going to go and start stalking and abusing. Some people turn the opposite direction and end up saying, wow, that was kind of fucked up. I don't want to be that guy. And they go seek help or their needy issues or whatever, and try to develop a healthier outlook of relationships. So.
Right. And, I do think that it's interesting that at least in certain typologies, if you've stalked one person, it's almost not even about the person they're stalking.
Usually never is.
Yeah, it's a behavior kind of like rape. If it wasn't this person, it's going to be another person,
right?
Because their need is to exert that control.
Right. It's most of the time it's controlling a reality, their reality, whether it's fantasy or whatever, and the victim's resistance to it is a challenge to their reality, which opens the door to resentment. Ultimately, even though it's somebody they quote unquote love.
Right. We have very different definitions of love. I mean, mine versus theirs. I'm not going to pontificate about yours, Joey. That's not what this is. That's a different podcast.
Yeah, all different. We'll say that for the OnlyFans version.
Joey and Ariel talk erotica. Anyway,
But what's in there was I was going to mention a couple other interesting studies that because it addressed questions I've had over the years when I try to look at things more academically. There's one by Miller and another one by Malloy and Fisher. They looked at the neurological approach, and basically taking those two together, you're looking at like two typologies. Basically, one either trying to basically build a romantic delusion, or they're trying to reclaim a lost romantic relationship. And there are sort of these studies. They're still not. I wouldn't say they're empirical. I mean, they kind of offer that caveat as well. But they give compelling arguments based on certain anecdotal cases, and where they see it as a combination of the operations of serotonin and dopamine. Serotonin has that sort of, it regulates your mood. It inhibits impulsiveness, and there's seen evidence that there's a reduced activity in serotonin while there's an increased activity in the dopamine, the pleasure system, which also actually aids in your ability to be coordinated and your ability to sort of it increases your short-term memory, but what is relevant is that it also increases impulsiveness. And so they think that sort of these activities it's like an addiction almost, is how I'm seeing that. My own research, I started to think maybe there's an addiction aspect of this, and I love their studies because they start to touch on that. So by getting the call back from the ex-girlfriend, even though if it's to stay the fuck away from me, to them that's a win. We've just interacted, and so it's increasing the reward system, and they're getting the pleasure again. And
right.
And they're not feeling so depressed, or whatever, and they're feeling motivated, and okay, now I got to escalate now, and I'm gonna go put some Christmas cards all over her porch and her parents' porch.
Well, and you see the same type of behaviors among serial killers, not to say that they're the same, because the way that you're describing the brain neurologically speaking, that's basically the opposite of a psychopath, right? So psychopaths tend to have really high levels of serotonin, so it takes a whole lot to produce more. But yeah, the way you're talking about addiction, a lot of people say, for instance, weed is not addictive, right? And I would beg to differ. There's not a chemical component of that addiction, but there is an experiential component. You can get addicted to anything, and you can certainly get addicted to another person.
You can get addicted to playing video games. I mean, that's been proven. There's no chemical. I guess the sort of twist I'm looking to see done, because I'm not a sociologist, but is aside from just the serotonin and dopamine factors, I often wondered what is happening with their oxytocin levels. Maybe these interactions is increasing their feelings of what they believe to be love. It's increasing and you're dealing with people with basically no or utterly destroyed love map, and that this is somehow feeding this love map in its own twisted way. They're getting this love that they desire. With that, I've often wondered, I don't know how you measure that. Are their oxytocin levels increasing as they escalate in their stalking behavior based on how the victim might be reacting?
I would venture a guess. Now, granted, like I've mentioned many, many times to my listeners, I am not a diagnostician and I am not a clinician. Mm-hmm. Okay. I am on the theoretical side of things, but that means I do have a pretty heavy understanding of disorders, personality issues, and things of that nature, and grounding in neuroscience as well. So I would assume that yes, those would rise, but I haven't found anything explicitly. I read Adrian Rain's The Killer Gene, and I would recommend that to anyone, especially as a social scientist, because it tackles the biological side of these things. And I feel like it's fair, even though I'm a very nurture over nature type of person.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about like we're born with a certain amount of trait receptivity, but it doesn't mean those traits are necessarily established upon birth. We are more or less likely to develop certain traits.
Sure. Yeah.
So all of that to say, there is a gene called monoamine oxidase. And the A type of this gene is present within the minds of psychopaths. And that's the thing that affects whether they have higher or lower centers of serotonin and dopamine. And the way that I'm looking at this in terms of addiction, which I think you're 100% spot on, I would say that that is definitely affecting that oxytocin. It's the same thing that's released when we have, a piece of chocolate or in a greater capacity fall in love.
Right. I agree. And that's what I feel it's important because, again, one of my biggest pet peeves is, when, again, people use these sort of hot words and buttons. Like right now, when you go to right now, the trend is narcissism or narcissist. Now they go, oh, yeah, my narc ex-boyfriend is talking. My stalker narc is, they're all about control and coercion. Yeah, a lot of them are. But sometimes, but if you look at for somebody like who's trying to like deal with their broken love map, increase their oxytocin levels, it's the coercion and control. You got to look at the end game for your stalker. That's what I found to be the difference in how I identify and address. Like I've been able to, sometimes with the more controlling ones, I've been able to prove myself to be more skilled or scary when need be scarier than the stalker. Or what I love doing is training my clients to be scarier. I train them to be a better stalker than the stalker. I teach them everything that they need to know about computer hacking, surveillance, counter surveillance, even self-defense, so that I harden them as a target and I take away that mystique that these stalkers or even hacker groups build on. They build on the ignorance and assumptions of the victims. And so that just empowers them. And that's great when you're dealing with one where the end is just control. But when you're looking for someone that has a deeper, I've had to get more creative. And sometimes that includes manufacturing in a certain degree a bond with the stalker as I found them and started to address them and allow me to get inside their head and their heart. That's worked in actually making them go away. Even if they're never fully identified, if I was able to hone enough on that profile to say this, it's been effective, or I would manufacture this bond and they would it would diffuse them. And that's important. And again, a cop isn't expected to do that, again, but again, I chose, what I do over law enforcement because I felt like this is where I was most useful, being and not limited by jurisdiction or politics or, policy, whatever, that I can help anybody anywhere for as long as it takes and wherever the case takes. But either way, it's important to understand these kind of deeper contexts and not put everything under, oh, they're a narcissist and they're completely all about control.
I just want to throw out there to everybody, everyone has narcissistic traits. Literally everyone on this planet. There's a reason for it, and it's rooted in survival. It's when somebody becomes a malignant narcissist that there is an issue.
Thank you.
Just a little disclaimer.
And I just feel it's potentially harmful to an investigation or even to the victim when they suddenly are building this confidence now because you see these victims, they'll start acting like they're more in control. And oh yeah, because he's a narc, and they get it causes them though to let their guard down, and that's just not good. And it causes them or whoever they hire to employ actions that might actually escalate them, because if you don't realize that maybe they're coming out of this weird love map issue or whatever, by just doing things like immediately attacking them, or saying, I hate you and all this other stuff, it might cause them to escalate, because now they're going to try harder to get that love. Oh, I guess I just got to try harder. It's not hurting their ego or pissing them off. It's increasing their sense of desperation. And I found that to be much more dangerous than anger. Desperation, at that point, it's like, if you feel like you have nothing to lose, then there's nothing that they're not willing to risk.
Yeah,
that's what
absolutely.
makes, I feel that. And so some of the most scary of predators are the ones I found to be who are motivated by desperation, not anger.
Right.
Just like terrorists, like the religious terrorists are the most dangerous because their ideologies are such that getting killed, arrested or whatever is actually something to be rewarded because they don't care what they lose here, because to them, they're gaining something else in another world. So that's what makes them dangerous, because they have nothing to lose. So they're willing to risk everything.
Right. And that's what completely taking a nod from Bob Dylan. When you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose.
Right. Or even school shootings. I've spoken with leaders on this, school principals, and, people say, oh, look for what they call leakage, which is a good term, but it's not always about looking for the one with the temper issue. Actually, I'd be looking at the one who seems to be becoming more withdrawn, who seems more depressed, because I found a lot more trends of these people who just didn't give a crap about their lives anymore. Not so much that they're always just pissed off at everybody. They might be pissed off, but to the point where they're pissed off because they've convinced them that they are worthless, but this is their final last hurrah or whatever. And they're going to take all these people. So I say, don't look for the one who's sticking out as anger. Look for the one who seems to be withdrawn, who seems more and more depressed. Pay attention to that person.
Right. That draws to mind Charles Whitman, the UT shooter, who went up in the tower and started sniping after he had murdered both his wife and his mother. And he was not an angry person at all. He had never shown signs of that, but he was becoming increasingly depressed. He was having more and more difficulty sleeping. He tried seeking help, and they basically were like, I don't know, take a nap. He got nothing from seeing professionals. And he was so concerned, and he even talked about how the reason that he killed his mother was because she had had such a miserable life at the hands of his father. And the reason that he killed his wife was because he didn't want her to have to face the shame of what he was going to do. And then he went and just started sniping people, from the tower. When it came right down to it, when they finally got to him in the tower and shot him, he didn't even resist. He knew he wasn't going to get out of there alive.
Right. They were resigned to dying. So absolutely. They had nothing to lose. So cops pointed a gun saying drop it doesn't mean anything to them. But understanding that, like, a good practical application, like when I talk about developing a false bond with, one client, her name, she went public with this, so it's okay to share. She's a musical artist, Marcella Detroit. She was the other half of a goth group called Shakespeare's Sister, but written, like, she's one of the most prolific writers I know. She's credited with writing Eric Clapton's Lay Down Sally, and a brilliant jazz artist as well, and blues. But she was stalked for years online. This was during the time before Facebook was a thing. It was mostly stuff was being done on like forums and MySpace. And this person's, messages and everything got more and more violent, graphic. Their descriptions more bloody. But I found in the context of all those things, it was always trying to build a connection. She wanted this need for a connection with Marcy. And so I saw that desperation, like someone who is clearly isolated based on various things I read, and sought connection, and something in her music somehow resonated with her, and she just honed in and latched onto that. That was her need. And so I was looking at how they wrote and everything. I'm like, this is like a young female thing. And so I created, this time people were chatting through like AOL Messenger and like MSN Messenger. It was like the big thing before people were getting on Facebook inboxing. And so I created a persona, and I, based on what their likes and everything were, I made this connection with them and spent, it didn't take me long. It's so desperate. It only took me like a week to build a bond with this person, and I didn't even have to like get romantic or anything. It was just, being as bitter and as sarcastic and pragmatic as they were. And they just like, I really like you. And I'm like, hey, yeah, let me, I can send you this, let me send you a postcard. You're going to get a kick out of this. And so then they gave me all their contact information, and that's how they were able to track down the stalker 8,000 miles away in another country, who turned to be very mentally disturbed. But they were able to address it head on and get them to get the help they needed, as well as prevent them from further harassing and threatening Marcy.
And that really is the best outcome.
Right. And that was because it built on this understanding that there was a need there. It wasn't going this other way saying, listen, you bastard, and I'm fighting back. I'm taking back my power, kind of. It would only escalated. You got to understand that the deeper context.
That's so fascinating. I'd love to get a little bit into victimology.
Yes.
And that's such a huge thing to me. I know it's a huge thing to you. And it's extremely important in understanding why certain things happen. This is just another disclaimer. Victimology is not the same as victim blaming. And we're probably going to say that more than a few times while we talk about this.
You're right.
But it is absolutely essential.
All right. Trigger warning.
I mean, look. Yeah.
You should like create like a trigger warning graphic that flashes every time we say something that's like we're about to say something, like, which will probably come up a lot. But.
Yeah, exactly. The one that just says, listen to the end, listen to the end. Right. Don't stop after this statement. Okay. Anyway. Yeah. So can you talk a bit about what that is and what the significance of it is in terms of stalking cases?
Well, in general, victimology is just the investigation or study of the victims of crime, understanding their lifestyle, their background, and their activities. Because again, you're trying to maybe find factors of victim precipitation. Now, again, that's not victim blaming, but sometimes victims can invite it themselves too. I mean, look at the Jodi Arias case. I mean, again, we were talked about that, and you pointed out very accurately about how the boyfriend seemed to be encouraging her,
Yes.
And so, that only helped escalation. So it's important to know these things. So like there have been like, some sort of industries out there or organizations I respect, like Spark and stuff. And I'll give links to all these people that I reference. But, they give this advice like don't ask the victim, like, why did they write them back? Just focus on I think that's the wrong way to go. You got to ask them that. You want to ask them what was motivating you, not to justify, but to understand what's motivating you, to help understand what's triggering them, so that we can then help them say, this is how we can avoid that trigger, so they can and stop feeding their escalation in that regard. Because it's sort of like these weird things that come out now where they say, oh, stop teaching women to not get raped. Start teaching boys not to rape. Well, that's all well and good. And granted, I'm going to teach, and I do teach my son, don't ever touch a woman, don't ever hit a woman, don't ever cross the boundary, don't ever raise your hand in anger. She hits you, walk away, and also I teach her, if your sister or somebody else is, in danger, you better damn well step in and let the principal say something. I'll go in and after your suspension, I'll go buy you an ice cream,
100%. And I've told my daughter the same thing.
It's important. But at the same time, I tell my daughter, she's grown to be this young, beautiful lady. And I'll say, don't wear this to school. You don't want to wear this to school. You don't want to wear this in that context, because they're not going to pay attention to you. They're going to pay attention to your body. I'm very direct with them. I'm like, there are pedophiles at shopping malls. So this is why I don't want you wearing this at shopping mall. And just to help her build her own understanding, so that when she is older and decides what the hell she's going to wear, it's an informed decision and she's aware. She's at least aware now. If she chooses at 22 to start wearing mini skirts to church, she's aware of how that could impact her. Or,
right.
And that's my job, not to control, but to inform.
Sure. And I think that as parents, in particular, we have a responsibility to do that. And it's not that I agree with you. I love the concept of teaching boys not to be violent towards women,
right,
and to respect their boundaries. Right. At the same time, there are people who are mentally disturbed. I'm not saying mentally ill, mentally disturbed. There are people who have personality disorders. There are people who have, all manner of things that can come together. And when juxtaposed, they're going to act on their impulses. Right. I don't think we're ever going to eradicate serial killers. I don't think we're ever going to be able to weed out every rapist in the world. It's just not going to happen. And so we have to consider, like, for instance, if I'm walking down an alley at 2:00 in the morning by myself, do I deserve to be raped or killed? Absolutely not. No. Absolutely not. Am I putting myself in the safest position?
Right.
No. Right. So, and those are the things. And that's what I would tell my daughter too. No one deserves to be murdered. Nobody. But we have to understand the lifestyles, the patterns, the things that these people, the places that they frequent.
The ways we make ourselves a target. And I know people are trying to cancel out those terms, but I'm sorry, they're realistic terms and they save lives. If you understand how you might make yourself a target, that's going to make you less of a target.
Right. If you don't like the language target, making yourself more vulnerable, right? That would essentially be what you're saying, right?
Right. I'm worried about the life of my client. I'm worried about the life of a relative or a friend that I'm talking to. I'm worried about their future, and we're trying to equip them to understand the reality that they live in and how to pardon themselves as a target. It's not to make them feel good or to affirm whatever pronoun I didn't use at that certain time or whatever. It's because these kind of crimes don't care about pronouns. They don't care about the language. It doesn't matter how many boys you educate not to rape. There's still going to be 100 other ones who just don't care and will do it. And so you want to teach people how to not be an easy target. Right. And so victimology basically is about understanding the victim and what was it if any, that contributed to this happening or continuing to perpetuate the crime in progress. It helps us to then find a solution. It's not about wagging a finger at the victim. I mean, because again, when I do my cases, I tell my clients right away. I tell my clients right away.
Wait, you said you're an expert in stalking? Is that?
Yeah.
Joking.
No, I tell my clients, look, for this to work, I need you to look at me as like your shrink or your priest and understand that I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to make any moral stand for you or your life. My job is to get the answers and then to teach you to, after this is done, to also teach you to never need someone like me again. And so for me to do that, I need your absolute trust. And it's important because these people are often handing over access to their emails, their Facebook profiles and everything else. And so I become privy to maybe some messages back and forth to people that they rather not know about, or, maybe it compromises the current relationship. I mean, I'm not going to go outing them on those things. Or, bunch of, who doesn't, I guess, sending nude selfies to somebody you start developing online. It happens. And so they're trusting me with a lot. But that's important because it helps me understand possible suspects that they didn't even consider because of that. And so I need to understand what they did, who they related to, and to maybe cause them to be targeted, and help them understand, like when they say, how are they knowing all this stuff about me? Like a lot of these people in severe cases, they assume like their stalker is a super spy who has 50 bugs everywhere. And it's much more simpler than that when they let me into their lives a little more. And I can understand, no, it's because you leave your window open when you shower this time of night. They're outside your house. Everything that you're saying that it's actually correlating with this online boyfriend that your husband doesn't know about. They're relaying facts that you've shared with them, and it's happened after you started breaking off with them,
Mm-hmm.
And they think, oh my gosh, I didn't think of that, because they were so nice when I told them, to trust, and I need to get in their life. That's victimology. It helps me understand these things.
Right. And I do think it's so important, like you were saying, essentially there's no perfect victim.
Right. The worst thing we can do in cases like this, whether it's stalking or homicide, is what we're already seeing in cases like Gabby Petito. Again, it's a relevant case. It's one that's fascinated me and frustrated me at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like this woman, I'm not looking to vilify her, but it didn't take long for her to basically be canonized. It's just practically Saint Gabby now,
Right.
And so when people try to offer like, oh, well, maybe she was a little harsh on her boyfriend, how could you? Oh, you're victim blaming, and then it cuts off dialogue and analysis for some people, which then cuts off the road to possibly solving the case. Did this victim live a high risk lifestyle? Mm-hmm. Like if they were tricking themselves out, that's a factor that needs to be known and discussed.
Right. And there are certain elements of a person's lifestyle that are going to be explicit that you can't really look beyond. But when you mentioned earlier that profilers don't want to know anything about particular suspects.
Right.
A lot of times there are details that they don't need to know about the victims either. They need to be able to assess, okay, this was their lifestyle, but they don't want to make moral judgments. They're not going to make moral judgments. What they're looking at is this person's life was taken.
Right. And in that sense, they're going to look at victimology again, more as the intelligence analyst. They're going to look at a wide variety, because usually they're there for like serial crimes. They're going to look at they're going to notice trends with the victims, because they're going to research the victims and say, oh, all of them were not only just white in between the ages of 22 and 30, but they all had a heroin addiction and were single moms and occasionally involved in petty crime, including prostitution. That's important to know, because then we understand like how they might be targeted.
Right. Exactly. It brings to mind is the Cleveland Strangler to me. We're looking at Black women as victims. They were all in a similar neighborhood, which was low SES. We're talking a lot of these women who turned to sex work in an attempt to sustain a crack cocaine habit. And so Sowell basically would invite them to come and do crack with him. And that's how, they're thinking, oh, I get a free fix. All right. Do I look at those women and think, well, she was
they brought it on themselves? Yeah. Right.
No, absolutely not. I mean, addiction is a beast, man. It's a beast. And nobody, when asked what they want to be when they grow up, nobody says junkie. It's just, and that's such an ugly term anyway. But like, yeah, you don't start out doing anything thinking, God, I hope I get hooked on this. It just happens. It happens in the case of cocaine and meth and, all of these other, very extreme drugs. There is a chemical component. So
Absolutely.
It's not just the fix that you get experientially. There is actually a part of your brain that's going, I need it. And in
terms of domestic violence, that's also some of the more sinister cases, could be that they get their spouse, girlfriend, whatever, hooked on drugs and make them dependent on them.
Absolutely.
That's not as common, but it is something to think about.
It happens.
Another element that they might build before the anger and control by creating dependency.
Absolutely. Any way they can build dependency,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely through things like substances, for sure.
Right. So again, usually when somebody's gifting you all this stuff and buying you stuff, they're trying to build financial dependency. But sometimes the more sinister ones will just get you hooked on speed or whatever.
Right. And when you need it, you need it. So
right.
Once again, in that case, it's not victim blaming. These women they had kids, they had families, many of them were just in dire straits because, they were born into a life of inequity, So, to me, I just think, no, these are their lives, their human lives.
They're still somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, somebody's mother.
And even if they weren't, you know what I mean? They're still somebody.
Right.
Pure and simple.
They matter.
Somebody. Absolutely. So yeah. So that's one more time. Say it with me. Not victim blaming.
Not victim blaming. But we can't cancel victimology, and it won't happen.
Right. So. And I mean, it may be controversial to people. People may think that I'm victim blaming. It's important. I'm not stepping back from it.
I wouldn't.
Sorry,
no.
Not sorry.
And I bet you one of those people became my client, they're suddenly not going to have a problem with it either. So
yeah. So yeah, I think this has all been very, very valuable information, Joey. I appreciate you so much making the time for this, for allowing me to put up the video uncut.
It'll be interesting.
All the hiccups and all. Everybody, if you would like to see the actual full uncut interview with Joey Ortega, it is on the $5 tier for Patreon. If you'd like ad-free episodes, you can go to patreon.com/malicepod. And from $1 a month, you will get ad-free episodes and bonus episodes and a whole lot more. So go check that out. I have my tiers delineated. You'll see everything you get, and I'm adding more all the time. So Joey, do you have anything that you'd like to say before we close out? Anything that you feel like we've missed, or just talking about how fabulous you are? Or
we can go on for days about this. We're talking about the specific typologies there's a lot to say, so I'm always happy to go about it. But I think we provided a good primer right now, and I think that's important. I'm always willing to answer questions and future people write in, and happy to come back. But and then of course we probably should wrap it up, because don't we have to re-record the shirtless version for the OnlyFans version of the show? Right,
absolutely. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, no problem. I remember you asked about this. But no, it's been my pleasure. It's my pleasure coming on here and just talking and educating and screwing around a little here. It's fun, it's very relaxing. I love your show. I love how I love how even your other, you looking at your other episodes, just you take a very awesome storyteller approach, which in a way that is akin to like Catherine Ramsland, one of the most brilliant storytellers. And so I can't wait to see you two on the same show together. That would be awesome.
That is a huge compliment. Thank you so much. Yeah. Wow, I'm blown away.
That's true. I mean it all. That's great.
That's insane. I think there's just a lot of mutual admiration with us. It's just been a joy getting to know you, and I will definitely be having you back on if you don't mind.
It'd be my pleasure.
That's awesome. I'd love to hear some more about the terrorism side of things too, and
Absolutely.
Going deeper into stalking, not in the context of DV. So
yeah, there are a lot of creative solutions that people can learn, and I will definitely include. I'll send you the links and stuff to these references, as well to some support support resources.
Perfect. All right. I will get those in the show notes. Patrons, I will have those linked as well for the audio and for the video. So So Joey, if people are trying to get a hold of you, where do they go?
Primarily, people find me through my LinkedIn. My consulting site is still being worked on. I think it's up, but I'm not having someone else do it who's smarter than me. But it's joeyortegaintel.com. But I'll include links to those as well, and
absolutely,
maybe my Spotify.
Great. Hey, there's no such thing as a shameless plug. There's only good business.
That's right.
So,
and actually, I'm going to enjoy doing that. I'm actually recording 2 tracks with a friend of mine she's the most recognized voice in like that game World of Warcraft.
Oh wow.
She does that Lament of the Highborn song with people love. Vanjie, she's an awesome woman. She's recording 2 dance tracks for me. So,
nice. You know everybody.
It's the benefits of being a nosy bastard and just getting up in everybody's business.
Well, one more time, thank you so much, Joey. Everybody, check him out. I mean, seriously, this guy's brilliant and has done a lot of impressive things. And I'm just going to let you know, I have in fact heard him sing, and it's incredible. So anyway, I don't think I could go on for days.
Wow.
So maybe off record. Anyway, no, he's great. And I just, one more time, I really appreciate you making the time to come
Thank
on.
you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure and a blast.
Thanks. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in with this bonus episode. I hope you've learned some things. I hope you have developed some strategies for how to sort of extricate yourself and deter those stalking behaviors. We will be having Joey back. He has a lot of expertise to share. Just the investigative process in general, I think, would be a really cool thing to cover with him. So until next time, I'm Ariel Cooksey, and this is Malice.
Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals like John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
He said to me, clowns can get away with murder.
Dr. Death, the undoctored story.
This guy's dangerous.
And Epstein's shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
There was this whole other world going on.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Buried in the Backyard and Snapped. And with the Dateline 24/7 channel that's always on.
Did you want her dead?
You can't not obsess. Sign up now at peacocktv.com. Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals like John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
He said to me, clowns can get away with murder.
Dr. Death, the undoctored story.
This guy's dangerous.
And Epstein's shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
There was this whole other world going on.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Buried in the Backyard and Snapped. And with the Dateline 24/7 channel that's always on.
Did you want her dead?
You can't not obsess. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.